The silence in the hospital waiting room felt heavier than the medical bills stacked on Sarah's lap. Her hands shook as she counted the crumpled $20 bills for the third time, knowing they wouldn't be enough. Not even close. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her 8-year-old daughter Emma's pale face as she slept in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her. "Mommy?" Emma's weak voice broke the quiet. Her big brown eyes opened slowly, still heavy with exhaustion from the latest round of treatments. "Are we going home soon?" Sarah forced a smile, the same one she'd been wearing like a mask for months. "Soon, baby. Just waiting for the doctor to finish some paperwork." But they both knew the truth. The paperwork wasn't medical reports or discharge instructions. It was payment plans and insurance denials. Forms that determined whether Emma would continue receiving the treatment that was slowly, miraculously, helping her fight the rare blood disorder that had turned their world upside down 6 months ago. Emma shifted in her chair, wincing slightly. Despite everything, she still had that spark in her eyes that made Sarah's heart ache with fierce love and desperate fear. "Mommy, remember that man on TV? The one with all the money who said his time costs $100. Sarah's stomach clenched. She remembered the interview too well. Tech billionaire Robert Sterling, 42 years old and worth more money than some small countries, making jokes on a late-night talk show about how he valued his time. "Every minute of my day is worth about $100, he'd laughed, the audience eating it up. "So if someone wants to waste my time, they better make it worth my while." The host had found it hilarious. Sarah had found it disgusting. Here she was, working 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment and pay for Emma's medicine. And this man was joking about making more money per minute than Sarah made in a week. "Why are you thinking about that, sweetheart?" Emma sat up straighter, and Sarah saw something in her daughter's expression that made her nervous. It was the same look Emma had gotten right before she'd convinced the ice cream truck driver to give her an extra scoop by telling him a joke, or when she talked their grumpy landlord into fixing their broken heater by drawing him a picture. "Because maybe he could help us," Emma said simply. "Emma, no." Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. "People like that don't help people like us. They live in a different world." "But I have $100, Emma whispered, pulling a crumpled bill from her pocket. Sarah's heart stopped. She recognized that bill. It was the $100 birthday gift from Emma's grandmother, money they'd been saving for emergencies. The same money Sarah had been staring at every night, knowing she'd eventually have to spend it on groceries or rent, hating herself for even considering it. "Emma, where did you get that idea?" "I heard you crying on the phone with Grandma," Emma said quietly. "You said you might lose your job because of the robots and then we can't afford my medicine anymore. But if his time costs $100 and I pay him, maybe he'll listen to me for 1 minute. 1 minute might be enough." The waiting room suddenly felt too small, too hot. Sarah pulled Emma closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo mixed with the antiseptic smell that seemed to follow them everywhere now. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the world doesn't work the way it should? That money and power create walls that kindness can't always break down? Baby, it's not that simple. Mr. Sterling probably gets thousands of people asking him for help every day. He has assistants and security and—" "But I have the $100, Emma repeated stubbornly. "And maybe if I ask really nicely, he'll remember what it was like to be scared." Sarah wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Her daughter's optimism was both her greatest strength and what terrified Sarah most. The world had ways of crushing that kind of hope, and Sarah had spent Emma's entire life trying to shield her from that reality. "Mr. Sterling isn't scared of anything, sweetheart. When you have that much money, you don't have to be scared." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers tracing the edges of the $100 bill. "Maybe," she said finally. "But maybe being not scared all the time makes you forget how to help people who are scared. Maybe that's why he needs someone to remind him." Before Sarah could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Emma Thompson? Dr. Martinez would like to see you both." As they walked down the sterile hallway, Emma slipped her small hand into Sarah's. "Mommy? There's going to be a big party tomorrow night for helping sick kids. I saw it on the poster by the elevator. Rich people go there to give money to hospitals." Sarah's steps slowed. "Emma, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Emma said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "that if Mr. Sterling is going to be there and I have his $100, maybe it's like fate or something." The word fate coming from her 8-year-old daughter's mouth made Sarah's chest tight. Emma had been through more medical procedures than most adults, had spent more time in hospitals than playgrounds, and yet she still believed in things like fate and kindness and the possibility that strangers might care. "Emma, Promise me you won't do anything without talking to me first.
I promise, Mommy.
But if we don't try, we'll never know, right? As they entered Dr. Martinez's office, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in the window. A tired mother in scrubs from her morning shift at the diner, and a small girl whose eyes held too much wisdom for her age, clutching $100 bill like it was a magic ticket to a different life. The most unsettling part wasn't Emma's plan. It was how much Sarah wanted to believe it might actually work. The grand ballroom of the Pinnacle Hotel sparkled like something from a fairy tale, all crystal chandeliers and gold accents that caught the light from every angle. Sarah felt completely out of place in her borrowed black dress and second-hand shoes, but Emma practically glowed with excitement beside her. "There are so many fancy people here, Mommy," Emma whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the sea of designer gowns and expensive suits. "Do you think they're all nice?" Sarah squeezed Emma's hand gently. They'd only gotten in because Sarah had volunteered to help serve drinks, hoping the extra $50 would help with groceries. She hadn't expected Emma to be allowed to come, but the organizer had taken one look at Emma's hospital bracelet and waved them both through with tears in her eyes. "Remember what we talked about?" Sarah murmured as they made their way through the crowd. "We're here so I can work, not to bother anyone." But Emma wasn't listening. Her attention was fixed on the far side of the room, where a small crowd had gathered around a tall man in an expensive navy suit. Even from a distance, Sarah recognized him from countless magazine covers and news interviews. Robert Sterling looked exactly like what he was: powerful, confident, and completely unreachable. "That's him," Emma breathed. "Emma, no. We're not doing this." But Emma had already started moving, her small body weaving through the crowd with determination that both impressed and terrified Sarah. By the time Sarah caught up, Emma was standing at the edge of the circle surrounding Robert Sterling, clutching her crumpled $100 bill like a lifeline. Robert was in the middle of telling some story about market volatility when he noticed the small figure at the edge of his audience. His voice trailed off as he took in Emma's serious expression and the way she was holding that money. "Excuse me," Emma said in her clearest, most polite voice. "Mr. Sterling? I have your $100. The silence that followed was so complete Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Every person in that circle turned to stare at Emma, some looking amused, others annoyed by the interruption. Robert Sterling himself looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm sorry," he said, crouching down to Emma's eye level. Up close, Sarah could see that his eyes were a deep blue-gray, and there were laugh lines around them that softened his intimidating presence slightly. "On TV you said your time costs $100, Emma explained patiently. "I need to talk to you for 1 minute, so I brought the money." She held out the crumpled bill with both hands, like she was making an offering. Someone in the crowd laughed uncomfortably. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment and started to step forward, but Robert raised a hand that somehow managed to be both gentle and commanding. "You saw me on television?" he asked Emma, and there was something in his voice that made the crowd go quiet again. "Yes, sir. You were talking about how important your time is. And it must be super important because you have so much money in big companies and stuff." Emma paused, then added with devastating honesty, "My mommy works 3 jobs and her time isn't worth very much money at all, but it's really important to me." Sarah wanted to disappear into the floor. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Emma's innocent words were highlighting every uncomfortable truth about their situation, and now this billionaire and his wealthy friends were all staring at them like they were some kind of charity case. But Robert Sterling wasn't looking at them like that at all. He was looking at Emma with something that might have been respect. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma Thompson. I'm 8 years old and I have a blood disease, but it's getting better with medicine." She said it matter-of-factly, the way other kids might mention their favorite color. "My mommy works for one of your companies, sort of. It's called TechFlow Solutions and they help make the programs for your bigger company." Robert's expression shifted slightly. "TechFlow is one of our subsidiaries, yes. What does your mother do there?" "She makes computer programs that think like people," Emma said proudly. "She's really smart, but her boss is going to fire her because they're getting robots to do the work instead. If mommy loses her job, we can't pay for my medicine anymore." The silence stretched out like a held breath. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on them, and she knew that by tomorrow, this whole embarrassing scene would probably be gossip at every country club in the city. She started to reach for Emma's arm to pull her away from this disaster, but Robert Sterling stood up and held out his hand. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the $100 bill. Emma placed it carefully in his palm. "You don't have to keep it if you don't want to help," she said seriously. "But I thought maybe if I paid you like everyone else does, you might listen for real." Robert studied the bill for a long moment. It was wrinkled and soft from being folded and unfolded, obviously precious to whoever had saved it. When he looked back at Emma, something in his expression had changed. "This is a lot of money," he said quietly. "It's my birthday money from Grandma," Emma admitted. "Mommy said we should save it for emergencies, but I think this is probably an emergency." "Emma," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "We should go. Mr. Sterling is busy and—" "Actually," Robert interrupted, and when he looked at Sarah, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not pity exactly, but a kind of focused attention that made her feel like he was really seeing her for the first time. "I think I have a minute to spare." He handed the $100 bill back to Emma. "Keep your money. But tell me more about these programs your mother writes that think like people." Emma beamed like she'd just won the lottery. "Oh, they're so cool. Mommy showed me one that can look at pictures and tell you stories about what's happening in them. And another one that can read people's writing and know if they're happy or sad or lying." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "Artificial intelligence with emotional recognition capabilities," he murmured, and Sarah realized he wasn't just being polite. He was genuinely interested. "My mommy says the programs learn just like kids do, by watching and copying and making mistakes until they get it right," Emma continued enthusiastically. "But her boss told everyone that her ideas weren't good enough, so they're going to use different programs instead." Something flickered across Robert's face. "What's your mother's boss's name?" Sarah found her voice at last. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry about this. Emma doesn't understand how these things work and—" "What's his name?" Robert repeated, but his tone was gentle rather than demanding. "James Morrison," Sarah said reluctantly. "He's the department head at TechFlow." Robert was quiet for a moment, and Sarah had the strangest feeling that he was filing that name away somewhere important in his mind. Then he looked back at Emma. "You know what? I think your minute is worth a lot more than $100, he said. "Would you and your mother like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere we can talk properly without all these people around." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You want to have dinner with us?" "I do," Robert said, and Sarah was surprised to realize he meant it. "I'd like to hear more about these programs that think like people. And I'd like to know more about the girl who was brave enough to walk up to a stranger and offer him exactly what she thought his time was worth." As the crowd around them began to disperse, disappointed that the drama was over, Sarah felt like she was in some kind of dream. This couldn't be real. Billionaires didn't have dinner with struggling single mothers and their sick children. There had to be a catch, some angle she wasn't seeing. But Emma was already chattering excitedly about what she wanted to wear to dinner, and Robert Sterling was pulling out his phone to give Sarah his assistant's number, and somehow, impossibly, it seemed like her daughter's crazy plan might actually be working. The most unsettling part was how much Sarah was starting to hope it would. Sarah stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning, practicing what she would say to Robert Sterling at dinner. "Thank you for your interest, but we can't accept charity," she whispered to her reflection. "Emma doesn't understand the complexities of business relationships." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The truth was she'd spent half the night researching Robert Sterling online, trying to understand what he might want from them. The man was worth billions, had been featured on magazine covers as one of the most eligible bachelors in the country, and could have dinner with literally anyone in the world. Why would he choose to spend time with a struggling programmer and her sick daughter? "Mommy, are you talking to the mirror again?" Emma's sleepy voice came from the doorway. Even at 6 in the morning, after everything they'd been through, Emma still managed to look at the world with bright, hopeful eyes. "I was just thinking out loud, baby. Go back to sleep. We don't have to leave for the hospital for another hour." But Emma padded into the bathroom and wrapped her thin arms around Sarah's waist. "You're worried about the dinner, aren't you?" Sometimes Emma's perceptiveness was scary. "A little," Sarah admitted. "I just want to make sure that we don't expect too much." "You mean you don't want me to get my hopes up?" Sarah turned around and knelt down to Emma's eye level. "Sweetheart, Mr. Sterling is being very kind, but we can't forget that he's a businessman first. He might just be curious about your story, or maybe he wants to help a little bit, but we can't count on him to solve our problems." Emma was quiet for a moment, her small fingers tracing the patterns on Sarah's worn robe. "Mommy? What if he's not just being kind? What if he actually likes talking to us?" "Then that would be wonderful," Sarah said carefully. "But we have to be prepared for any outcome, okay?" What Sarah didn't tell Emma was that she'd also spent part of the night researching James Morrison, her boss at TechFlow. What she'd found had made her stomach churn with a mixture of rage and sick understanding. 3 of her innovations from the past year had been patented under Morrison's name. The emotional recognition software that Emma had described so enthusiastically to Robert Sterling? That was Sarah's code, her late nights, her breakthrough moments when she'd finally figured out how to make artificial intelligence understand human feelings. Morrison had taken it all and claimed credit, then used that success to justify cutting her department down to almost nothing. She'd been so focused on Emma's treatments, so grateful just to have a job with health insurance, that she hadn't paid attention to the warning signs. Morrison had been asking for detailed reports on all her projects, requesting copies of her code for backup purposes, scheduling meetings to discuss her progress, that were really interrogation sessions about her methods. The worst part was that she had proof. Emails, time-stamped code files, even recordings of meetings where she'd presented her ideas months before Morrison had developed them. But what could she do with that proof? Morrison was the department head, she was just a programmer, and she needed this job too desperately to risk making waves. "Mommy? You're making your worried face again." Sarah forced a smile. "Sorry, baby. I was just thinking about work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But as they went through their morning routine, breakfast, medicine, the careful ritual of getting ready for another day of hospital visits and treatments, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Robert Sterling's interest in her work wasn't casual curiosity. He'd asked very specific questions last night, the kind of questions that suggested he knew more about artificial intelligence development than most people. The phone rang as they were getting ready to leave. Sarah almost didn't answer, thinking it might be another call from a debt collector or the insurance company, but Emma's hopeful expression made her pick up. "Miss Thompson? This is Janet Collins, Mr. Sterling's assistant." The voice was crisp, professional, and intimidating. "Mr. Sterling asked me to call about your dinner arrangements tonight." "Oh yes. Actually, I wanted to talk to someone about that. I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to." Mr. Sterling suggested Bella Vista, the Italian restaurant on 5th Street. "Do you know it?" He thought Emma might enjoy their chocolate cake. Sarah blinked. Bella Vista was nice but not ostentatiously expensive, the kind of place where a family could have dinner without feeling out of place. And he'd remembered that Emma loved chocolate. "That sounds lovely, but..." "He also asked me to let you know that he's looked into the situation at TechFlow Solutions," Janet continued, and Sarah's blood went cold. "He'd like to discuss some concerns he has about intellectual property management in that division." The phone suddenly felt heavy in Sarah's hand. "What kind of concerns?" "I think that's something he'd prefer to discuss with you in person. Shall we say 7 o'clock? After Sarah hung up, Emma studied her face with the intensity of someone much older than 8. "That was about the dinner, wasn't it? You look like you do when the doctors want to talk about test results." "Mr. Sterling wants to talk about work stuff," Sarah said slowly. "I think he might know about the problems with my boss." Emma's eyes widened. "The boss who steals your ideas?" Sarah had tried to shield Emma from the worst of their financial stress, but her daughter was smart and observant. She'd overheard enough phone conversations to understand the basics of their situation. "I never said he steals my ideas." "You didn't have to," Emma said matter-of-factly. "You get the same look when you talk about him that you get when someone cuts in line at the grocery store. Like they're taking something that isn't theirs." Sometimes Sarah wondered if having such a perceptive daughter was a blessing or a curse. "Even if that's true, it's complicated, Emma. I can't just accuse my boss of stealing without proof, and even if I had proof, I might lose my job for causing trouble. But Mr. Sterling is the boss of your boss, right? So maybe he can fix it." The simplicity of Emma's logic was both comforting and terrifying. In Emma's world, problems had solutions and people in positions of power used that power to help others. Sarah had learned through painful experience that the real world rarely worked that way. But as they drove to the hospital for Emma's appointment, Sarah found herself thinking about Robert Sterling's expression when Emma had handed him that $100 bill. There had been something in his eyes that suggested he understood exactly what that money represented, not just currency, but hope and sacrifice and the desperate faith of a child who believed the world could be fair. Maybe, just maybe, Emma was right about him. The question was, what did he want in return? Bella Vista was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the kind of comfortable atmosphere that made Sarah feel like they belonged there. Robert Sterling was already waiting when they arrived, standing up from his table with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see them. "Emma, you look beautiful," he said, and Emma practically glowed in her favorite purple dress, the one they'd bought for special occasions back when they could afford special occasions. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Mommy helped me pick it out." Emma slid into the booth across from him with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to be intimidated by wealth or status. This place smells really good. Like my grandma's kitchen when she makes lasagna. Robert laughed, and Sarah was struck by how different he seemed from the polished businessman she'd seen on television. His suit was still expensive, but he'd loosened his tie, and there was something relaxed about his posture that made him seem more human. Please call me Robert. And your mother is right, you do look beautiful. Both of you do. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd borrowed a dress from her neighbor and spent an hour trying to do something with her hair, but she still felt underdressed next to Robert's obvious wealth. Thank you. This is very kind of you. It's my pleasure. I don't get many dinner invitations from 8-year-old entrepreneurs. Emma giggled. I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't even know what that means. It means someone who sees a problem and figures out a creative way to solve it, Robert explained. Like bringing a $100 bill to someone who jokes about the price of their time. As they ordered dinner, Sarah watched Robert interact with Emma and felt something unexpected happening. He wasn't talking down to her or being condescending. Instead, he listened to her stories about school and her favorite books with the same attention he probably gave to board meetings and business negotiations. So you like science fiction? He asked when Emma mentioned her favorite book series. Oh yes. Especially stories about robots that become friends with humans. Mommy says the programs she writes are kind of like robot brains but nicer. Robert's eyes flicked to Sarah. Your mother is very talented. I've been reading about some of the innovations coming out of TechFlow, and they're impressive. Sarah's stomach tightened. I'm just one programmer on a team. Nothing special. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Robert's voice was careful, but there was steel underneath the politeness. I had my technical team do some research after our conversation last night. The emotional recognition software that's been generating so much buzz? The predictive analysis program that helped increase efficiency by 30%? Those both have your fingerprints all over them. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. I don't know what you mean. Mommy, Emma said quietly, you don't have to pretend. Robert seems nice. Maybe he can help. Robert leaned forward slightly. Sarah, I know this is uncomfortable, but I need you to understand something. What James Morrison has been doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal. He's been systematically stealing intellectual property from his team members and claiming credit for their work. Even if that's true, I can't prove it. And even if I could prove it, I can't afford to lose my job. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Emma's treatments cost more than I make in 6 months. Without the insurance. What if I told you that you wouldn't lose your job? What if I told you that there's a way to expose what Morrison's been doing without putting your position at risk? Sarah looked at him skeptically. How? Robert smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in his expression. Let me tell you a story about due diligence. When a company like mine is considering major investments or partnerships, we do very thorough research into the management structure of our subsidiaries. Sometimes that research uncovers discrepancies. Emma was following the conversation with the intense focus she usually reserved for her favorite TV shows. What kind of discrepancies? Well, Robert said, clearly enjoying having such an engaged audience, sometimes we discover that patents are being filed under the wrong names. Or that the people claiming credit for innovations weren't actually the ones who developed them. Sarah's heart started beating faster. And what happens when you discover things like that? Generally speaking, we make corrections. We want to make sure the right people are being recognized and rewarded for their contributions. After all, innovation is the heart of what we do. But Morrison is the department head, Sarah protested. He has documentation, reports, meeting notes, all of which can be cross-referenced with time-stamped code repositories, email records, and security footage of who was actually in the lab during key development periods. Robert's smile widened. It's amazing what a thorough investigation can uncover. Emma clapped her hands together. So you're going to catch the bad guy. Like a detective story. Something like that, Robert agreed. But Emma, this is very important. We need to keep this conversation between us for now. Can you do that? Emma nodded solemnly. I'm very good at keeping secrets. I never told anyone that Mommy cries in the bathroom sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but Robert's expression softened with something that looked like understanding rather than pity. Your mommy loves you very much, he said gently. Sometimes when people love someone, they worry so much that it makes them sad. That doesn't mean anything is wrong with the person they love. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly. I cry sometimes too, but not because I'm scared of being sick. I cry because I don't want Mommy to be worried all the time. The simple honesty of Emma's words hit Sarah like a punch to the chest. She'd been so focused on protecting Emma from their financial stress that she hadn't realized Emma was trying to protect her right back. Robert reached across the table and gently touched Sarah's hand. "You're both very brave," he said quietly. "And you're not going to have to worry about this much longer." For the first time in months, Sarah felt something that might have been hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope she'd been carrying like a burden, but something steadier and more sustainable. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "You could have anyone over for dinner. You could solve problems for people who have more to offer in return." Robert was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Do you know what it's like to have so much money that nothing costs anything anymore? When you can buy whatever you want, whenever you want it, things stop having value. Everything becomes easy." Emma leaned forward, fascinated. "That sounds nice. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's actually kind of lonely. When everything is easy, when everyone wants something from you, it becomes hard to know who actually likes you for who you are." He looked at Emma, then at Sarah. "But you two didn't want anything from me except 1 minute of my time. And Emma offered to pay for it fairly." "I still have the $100, Emma said helpfully. "If you change your mind." Robert laughed, and Sarah realized it was the first completely genuine laugh she'd heard from him. "Keep your money, Emma. I think I'm getting the better deal in this friendship." As they shared the chocolate cake that Emma had been promised, Sarah felt something shifting inside her chest. For the first time in months, she wasn't calculating the cost of every bite of food or wondering how she'd pay tomorrow's bills. Instead, she was watching her daughter laugh with a man who seemed to genuinely enjoy her company, and she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, their luck was finally changing. The most surprising part was how much she was enjoying Robert's company too. Beneath the wealth and power, he was funny and kind and surprisingly easy to talk to. When he looked at her, she didn't feel like a charity case or a problem to be solved. She felt like a person worth knowing. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. Robert's office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower was nothing like what Sarah had expected. Instead of intimidating leather and dark wood, the space was filled with natural light, comfortable chairs, and walls covered with whiteboards full of equations and sketches that looked more like an inventor's workshop than a CEO's domain. "I do my best thinking when I can write on the walls," Robert explained, noticing Sarah's surprise as she looked around. Emma was at the children's hospital for her weekly treatment, and Robert had asked Sarah to come in to discuss the Morrison situation. "It's not what I imagined," Sarah admitted. "What did you imagine?" "Something more intimidating, I guess. More like what you see in movies about powerful businessmen." Robert smiled. "I tried that for a while when I first started the company. Had a designer come in and create this whole imposing atmosphere with expensive art and furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on. It was miserable. I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life." He gestured for her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near the windows that overlooked the city. From this height, the problems of the world below seemed very small and far away. "Coffee?" "I think Janet keeps some of those fancy teas that are supposed to be calming." "Coffee is fine," Sarah said, still trying to process the surreal nature of being 42 floors above her normal life, having coffee with a billionaire who was genuinely concerned about her stolen code. Robert poured coffee from a machine that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, then sat down across from her with a thick folder in his hands. "I need you to look at some things," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "My team has been doing that due diligence investigation I mentioned, and what we've found is worse than I initially thought." He opened the folder and spread several documents across the small table between them. Sarah recognized some of them immediately: her own code, her project proposals, even emails she'd sent to Morrison explaining her ideas. "This is Morrison's patent application for the emotional recognition software," Robert said, pointing to one document. "Filed 6 months ago under his name as the sole inventor." Then he showed her another document. "This is the metadata from your code repository, showing that you uploaded the core algorithms 8 months ago." Sarah's hands were shaking as she picked up the papers. Seeing the evidence laid out so clearly made her feel sick and vindicated at the same time. "There's more," Robert continued gently. "We found similar patterns with at least 4 other projects over the past 2 years. Morrison has been systematically taking credit for work done by his team members, then using those false credentials to justify budget cuts and layoffs. How many people has he done this to? 7 that we can prove. You're not the only brilliant programmer he's been exploiting, Sarah. There are others who've lost their jobs, their reputations, their innovations, all so Morrison could advance his own career." Sarah sank back in her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what Robert was showing her. What happens now? Now we make it right. Robert's voice carried a quiet intensity that reminded Sarah why he'd been so successful in business. Morrison is going to be terminated immediately, obviously. All the patents will be corrected to show the real inventors. And I'm offering you Morrison's position as head of the AI development division. Sarah stared at him. What? You heard me. The position comes with a salary increase of about 300%, full benefits, and a research budget that will let you pursue the kind of innovations I know you're capable of. Robert, I can't just take someone's job, even if he's been stealing from me. You're not taking his job, Sarah. You're taking your job. The job you should have had all along if Morrison hadn't been sabotaging your career. Robert leaned forward. Look at this work. Look at what you've accomplished despite having every obstacle thrown in your way. You've been doing Morrison's job better than he has while being paid a fraction of what he makes. Sarah picked up one of the code printouts, recognizing her own elegant solutions to problems that had kept her awake for weeks. I've never managed a team before. You've been mentoring junior programmers for 2 years. 3 of them have told us that you taught them more in 6 months than they learned in their entire computer science programs. Robert smiled. Besides, I have a feeling you'll figure it out. Emma certainly thinks you can do anything. The mention of Emma made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. This would mean Emma could get the treatment she needs. The experimental therapy that insurance won't cover. Emma could get whatever treatment she needs whenever she needs it. You'd never have to choose between your daughter's health and paying rent again. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city spread below them. Somewhere down there, Emma was probably charming the nurses at the hospital, making friends with other kids in the treatment center, being brave in ways that most adults never had to be. There's something else, Robert said softly. I've been in contact with some specialists at Children's Research Hospital. They're developing a new treatment protocol that could be exactly what Emma needs. Not just to manage her condition, but potentially to cure it entirely. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as her hands began to shake. Cure it. It's experimental and there are no guarantees. But the early results are promising, and Emma would be an ideal candidate. Robert's voice was gentle but confident. The treatment isn't available through normal channels yet, but as head of AI development for Sterling Industries, you'd have access to our medical research partnerships. Robert. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on something beyond the windows. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone else? Sarah nodded. When I was 12, my younger sister got sick. Really sick. My parents had money, but not enough for the experimental treatments she needed. I watched my father work 3 jobs, watched my mother sell everything she owned, watched them sacrifice everything trying to save her. His voice became very quiet. It wasn't enough. We lost her. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Robert, I'm so sorry. I swore that when I grew up, when I had money and power, I'd never let another family go through what mine did. But you know what? I've made billions of dollars, and until Emma walked up to me with that $100 bill, I'd forgotten that promise entirely. He looked at Sarah directly, and she saw something raw and honest in his expression. Emma reminded me why I wanted to be successful in the first place. Not for the money or the recognition, but to have the power to help people when it really matters. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So this is charity after all. No, Robert said firmly. This is business. I'm offering you a position because you're the most talented programmer I've encountered in years. I'm helping with Emma's treatment because I want the people who work for me to be able to focus on their jobs instead of worrying about medical bills. And I'm spending time with both of you because... He paused, looking almost vulnerable. Because I haven't enjoyed anyone's company this much and longer than I can remember. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way Robert looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. What if I'm not good enough? She asked quietly. What if I take this job and fail? Then you'll fail while earning 10 times what Morrison was paying you, with full medical coverage for Emma, and with the knowledge that you're actually being credited for your work. Robert smiled. But you won't fail, Sarah. I've seen what you can do when you're working with limited resources and constant stress. Imagine what you'll accomplish when you have proper support. Sarah looked around Robert's office again, trying to imagine herself working in a place like this, leading a team, making decisions that could affect thousands of people. A year ago it would have seemed impossible. But a year ago she'd never imagined her 8-year-old daughter would march up to a billionaire and offer him $100 for his time either. When would I start? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next week, next month, Whatever works best for Emma's treatment schedule. Sarah took a deep breath. I have one condition. Name it. I want to contact the other programmers Morrison stole from. If I'm going to run this department, I want to offer them positions too. They deserve to have their careers back. Robert's smile was brilliant. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already had my team reach out to them. 4 of the 7 are interested in coming back, and 2 others want to work remotely. The team you'll be inheriting is going to be the strongest AI development group in the industry. As Sarah signed the paperwork that would transform her life and Emma's future, she realized that the most remarkable thing wasn't the salary or the benefits or even the possibility of Emma's cure. It was the way Robert looked at her, like she was his equal, like her ideas and opinions mattered, like she was someone he genuinely wanted to work with rather than someone he was rescuing. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like herself again. Not just Emma's mother or a struggling programmer, but Sarah Thompson, innovator, problem solver, and apparently the future head of AI development for one of the most successful tech companies in the world. The most surprising part was how right it felt. The Sterling Industries boardroom fell silent as Robert finished explaining the situation with James Morrison and TechFlow Solutions. Sarah sat beside him, still adjusting to the reality of being in a room where decisions affecting thousands of people were made over coffee and Danish pastries. How extensive is the intellectual property theft? Asked Margaret Chin, the company's chief legal officer. 7 confirmed cases over 2 years, Robert replied, sliding copies of the evidence across the polished table. Potentially millions of dollars in misattributed patents and innovations. Sarah watched the board members' faces as they reviewed the documents. These were some of the most powerful people in the tech industry, and they were taking her stolen code seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been afraid to complain about Morrison to HR. Now she was watching a room full of executives plan his downfall. The liability exposure alone makes termination necessary, said Robert's CFO, Michael Torres. But what about the department restructuring? That's where Sarah comes in, Robert said, and Sarah felt all eyes turn to her. She'll be taking over as head of AI development, effective immediately. With respect, said board member Patricia Williams, Ms. Thompson has never managed a department this size. Are we sure she's ready for this level of responsibility? Sarah felt her old insecurities rising, but Robert's confidence in her gave her strength. I know it's a big step, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. But I've been essentially doing Morrison's job for the past year while he took credit for my work. The difference is that now I'll actually have the authority to implement the innovations I've been developing. What's your first priority? Asked Margaret. Sarah had thought about this extensively since Robert first offered her the position. Integration. Morrison kept the team fragmented so we couldn't compare notes or collaborate effectively. When talented people work in isolation, they can't build on each other's strengths. My first goal is to create an environment where innovation happens through collaboration, not competition. Robert smiled, and Sarah could see approval in his expression. Tell them about the emotional AI project. Right now we have 3 separate teams working on related problems: natural language processing, emotional recognition, and predictive behavior modeling. Morrison kept them working separately, probably so he could claim credit for each breakthrough individually. Sarah's confidence grew as she talked about the work she loved. But if we integrate their research, we could develop AI that doesn't just recognize human emotions, but actually responds to them appropriately. Customer service applications, healthcare monitoring, educational software. The possibilities are enormous. Timeline? Asked Michael. 6 months for a working prototype, assuming I can bring back the programmers Morrison pushed out. Sarah looked around the table. Some of the best minds in the industry are working for our competitors now because Morrison made their lives miserable here. I want to offer them the chance to come home. The discussion continued for another hour, covering budgets and timelines and technical specifications. Sarah found herself answering questions about AI development that 6 months ago would have been way above her pay grade. But Robert had been right. She'd been ready for this job long before she'd realized it herself. As the meeting broke up, Margaret approached Sarah privately. I wanted you to know that I've reviewed Morrison's personnel files very carefully. There are at least 3 other cases of potential discrimination and harassment that we're investigating. What he did to you wasn't just theft. It was part of a pattern of targeting talented women and minorities in his department. Sarah felt sick. How many people has he hurt? More than we initially realized. But because of your courage in speaking up, we're going to be able to make it right for all of them. After the board meeting, Robert walked Sarah back to her new office, Morrison's old office. which was being completely redecorated according to her preferences. The intimidating dark furniture was being replaced with collaborative workspaces and writable walls like Robert's office. "How are you feeling?" Robert asked as they looked out the windows at the city below. "Overwhelmed. Excited. Terrified." Sarah laughed. "Mostly grateful. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this is all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's what happens when talent finally gets the recognition it deserves." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Emma's treatment had gone well, and she was asking when Robert the nice man was coming to visit again. "She wants to know if you're coming to see her today," Sarah said, showing him the message. "I was planning on it if that's okay with you. I brought her something." "What kind of something?" Robert looked almost shy. "A laptop. Kid-friendly but with some basic programming software. I thought maybe she'd like to try creating something of her own." Sarah felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Robert, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." "Emma is brilliant, and she's curious about the work you do. Maybe she'll decide she wants to follow in her mother's footsteps. Or maybe she'll decide she wants to be a billionaire who helps sick kids and gives people second chances." Robert was quiet for a moment. I never thought about having kids before. My life has been all about work and success and building the company. But watching you with Emma, it makes me wonder what I've been missing." There was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him more carefully. Over the past few weeks, she'd started to notice things about Robert that had nothing to do with his wealth or power. The way he listened when people talked. The way he remembered small details about what mattered to them. The way he looked at Emma like she was genuinely fascinating rather than just cute. And the way he looked at Sarah like she was someone he wanted to know better, not just professionally but personally. "Robert," she said carefully, "what exactly is happening here? Between us, I mean." He turned to face her fully, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I know that I think about you and Emma when I'm not with you. I know that having dinner with you is the best part of my week. I know that watching Emma light up when she talks about science makes me want to fund every children's hospital in the country." Sarah felt her breath catch. "That's not an answer." "Then let me try again." Robert stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue-gray eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with both of you. With Emma's courage and your brilliance and the way you've built this beautiful life together despite everything you've been through." The words hit Sarah like electricity. "Robert, I know it's complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this might not work. But Emma paid me $100 for 1 minute of my time, and that minute changed everything. I want to know what happens if we take it one day at a time and see where it leads." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The hospital. "Miss Thompson?" The voice was Dr. Martinez, Emma's oncologist. "I have some news about Emma's latest test results. Could you come in as soon as possible?" Sarah's world tilted. "Is she okay? The treatment today went fine, I thought." "She's fine," Dr. Martinez said quickly. "But we need to discuss some changes to her treatment plan. How soon can you get here?" As Sarah gathered her things with shaking hands, Robert was already calling for his driver. "I'm coming with you," he said, and it wasn't a question. For the first time since Emma had gotten sick, Sarah didn't have to face scary medical news alone. And that realization was almost as overwhelming as whatever Dr. Martinez needed to tell them. Dr. Martinez's office felt different this time. Instead of the usual careful optimism mixed with barely concealed worry, there was something that looked almost like excitement in the doctor's expression. Emma sat between Sarah and Robert, swinging her legs from the tall chair and looking remarkably calm for someone whose test results had prompted an urgent meeting. Sarah envied her daughter's ability to live in the moment rather than imagining all the terrible possibilities. "First, let me assure you again that Emma is not in any immediate danger," Dr. Martinez began. "In fact, her response to the current treatment has been better than we hoped." "Then why the urgent meeting?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with residual panic. "Because we've received approval for Emma to participate in a clinical trial that could change everything." Dr. Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "It's the experimental treatment I mentioned months ago, gene therapy that could potentially cure her condition entirely." Sarah felt Robert's hand find hers, warm and steady and reassuring. "What does that mean exactly?" Emma asked with the matter-of-fact curiosity that consistently amazed the medical staff. "It means we would use special medicine to fix the part of your blood that isn't working right," Dr. Martinez explained. "Instead of just treating your symptoms, we might be able to fix the root cause." "Like debugging code?" Emma looked at Sarah. When mommy finds the broken part in a program and fixes it so the whole thing works better? That's actually a very good analogy, Dr. Martinez said, smiling. The treatment involves modifying some of your cells so they can produce the proteins your body needs. Sarah's mind was racing. What are the risks? Significant but manageable. The treatment is intensive. Emma would need to be in the hospital for about 6 weeks, with careful monitoring throughout. There's a small chance of complications, but the success rate so far has been remarkable. How remarkable? Robert asked quietly. 85% of participants have shown complete remission within 6 months. Of those, 90% remain disease-free after 2 years. The numbers hit Sarah like a physical blow. Complete remission. Disease-free. Words she'd stopped allowing herself to hope for. What's the catch? Sarah asked because there was always a catch. Cost. The treatment isn't covered by insurance yet because it's still experimental. The total cost for the 6-week program is approximately $400,000. Sarah's heart sank. Even with her new salary, even with the signing bonus Robert had insisted on, $400,000 might as well have been $4 million. However, Dr. Martinez continued, we've received some unusual news. An anonymous donor has offered to sponsor Emma's participation in the trial. All costs covered, plus additional support for family expenses during the treatment period. Sarah looked at Robert, who was studying his hands with intense concentration. Robert. It's anonymous, he said quietly. That means you can't thank whoever it is or feel obligated to them in any way. Robert Sterling, you cannot. I cannot what? Use my money to help someone I care about? Watch a brilliant little girl get a chance at a normal life and not do everything in my power to make that happen. Robert looked at Emma, then at Sarah. $400,000 is a lot of money to you. To me, it's what I spend on office supplies in a year. Emma was looking back and forth between them with growing excitement. Does this mean I might get all the way better? Like, never have to come to the hospital for treatments anymore? It's possible, sweetheart, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. It's very possible. And Robert paid for it? Like how I tried to pay him for his time. Something like that, Robert said gently. Emma turned to Robert with the serious expression she wore when she was about to say something important. Robert, I think you're my very best friend who isn't my mommy. The simplicity of Emma's declaration seemed to hit Robert harder than any business negotiation or board meeting ever had. Sarah watched this powerful, confident man completely melt at the trust in her daughter's voice. You're my very best friend too, Emma, he said, and Sarah could see that he meant it completely. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. I'll need an answer within the next week. The next treatment cycle begins in 10 days. As they left the hospital, Emma chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to do when she was all the way better, Sarah felt like she was walking through a dream. 6 months ago, she'd been calculating whether they could afford both groceries and Emma's medicine. Now Emma might be cured entirely, and Sarah was about to start a job that would let her build the kind of AI system she'd only dreamed about. I need to ask you something, Sarah said to Robert as Emma ran ahead to the car, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched to catch snowflakes. Anything. Is this real? The job, the treatment, the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. Is any of this actually real? Robert stopped walking and turned to face her. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot, and somewhere in the distance, Emma was laughing as she tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Sarah, I have never been more real about anything in my life, he said quietly. I know this all happened fast. I know it probably seems too good to be true. But sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. I'm scared of hoping too much. I'm scared of depending on someone again. I'm scared that Emma will get attached to you and then you'll decide this is too complicated and walk away. Robert reached up and gently brushed a snowflake from Sarah's cheek. I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I can't promise that we won't have challenges or disagreements or moments when this all feels overwhelming. But I can promise that I'm not going anywhere. Emma changed my life when she handed me that $100 bill, but you changed my heart. Before Sarah could respond, Emma came running back to them, her cheeks pink with cold and excitement. Are you guys going to kiss? She asked with the blunt curiosity of an 8-year-old. Because in movies, when people look at each other like that, they usually kiss. Sarah felt her face turn red. Emma? It's okay, Mommy. I think it would be nice if you kissed Robert. He makes you smile the way you used to smile before I got sick. Robert looked at Sarah with a question in his eyes. Only if your mommy wants to. Sarah looked at this man who had appeared in their lives like something from a fairy tale, who had seen her daughter's worth in a crumpled $100 bill, who had recognized Sarah's talent when her own boss was stealing it, who was giving Emma a chance at a normal life without asking for anything in return. "I want to," she said softly. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Emma was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "This is the best day ever," Emma announced. "I might get all the way better. Mommy has the best job in the world and Robert is going to be my daddy." "Emma," Sarah started to say, but Robert laughed. "I think I like the sound of that," he said, and Sarah realized that somewhere between the hospital and the parking lot, between fear and hope, between the life she'd known and the life she'd never dared to imagine, she'd started to believe in fairy tales again. The most amazing part was that this fairy tale was real. 6 weeks later, Sarah sat in Emma's hospital room watching her daughter teach Robert how to play a complicated card game she'd invented during her treatment. Emma's energy was remarkable. The gene therapy was working better than anyone had dared to hope, and her latest test results showed her blood counts returning to normal ranges for the first time in over a year. "No, Robert, you can't use the dragon card when there's already a princess on the table," Emma explained patiently. "That's against the rules." "What if the dragon and the princess are friends?" Robert asked seriously, as if this card game were a matter of international importance. "Then you have to play the friendship card first to make it official," Emma said, producing a hand-drawn card with 2 stick figures holding hands. "See? I made special cards for when people want to be friends instead of fighting." Sarah smiled as she worked on her laptop, coding the final modules for the integrated AI system that was going to launch Sterling Industries into a new era of artificial intelligence. Her team, the programmers Morrison had driven away, plus several new brilliant minds Robert had helped her recruit, had exceeded every expectation. They were 3 months ahead of schedule and had developed capabilities that were years beyond what their competitors were attempting. "How's the presentation coming along?" Robert asked, looking over at Sarah's screen. "Almost finished. The board is going to be impressed." Sarah saved her work and closed the laptop. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Tomorrow was Emma's final evaluation before being discharged from the hospital. If her blood work came back clear, she would officially be in complete remission, cured, not just treated. "I'm trying not to get too excited," Emma said, but her whole face was glowing with anticipation. "Dr. Martinez says the numbers look really good, but numbers can be tricky sometimes." Sarah marveled again at her daughter's wisdom. At 9 years old, Emma had celebrated her birthday in the hospital with a party that included half the medical staff. She understood things about hope and disappointment that most adults never learned. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've been incredibly brave through all of this," Robert said gently. "I wasn't brave," Emma corrected him. "I was scared lots of times. But Mommy taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you have to do even when you are scared." Robert looked at Sarah with an expression that made her heart skip. Over the past 6 weeks, as Emma had undergone treatment and Sarah had thrown herself into her new job, Robert had been a constant presence in their lives. He'd spent evenings in the hospital room, brought Emma books and games, listened to Sarah's work frustrations, and somehow made their strange new reality feel like home. "Your mommy is very smart," Robert said to Emma, but his eyes stayed on Sarah. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, holding Emma's latest test results. Sarah felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety, even though every sign pointed to good news. "Emma, are you ready to hear how you're doing?" Dr. Martinez asked, his smile giving away the answer before he spoke. "I'm ready," Emma said, sitting up straighter in her hospital bed. "Your blood counts are completely normal. No sign of abnormal cells, no indication of disease activity, no need for further treatment." Dr. Martinez's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Emma, you are officially cured." The word, cured, hung in the air like magic. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. Emma whooped with joy and threw her arms around Robert, who looked like he might be crying too. "Does this mean I can go to regular school? And play on the playground? And not have to come back here for treatments?" Emma's questions tumbled over each other. "You can do everything that other kids your age do," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "You'll need regular checkups for the next few years, but Emma, you have every reason to expect a completely normal, healthy life." Sarah couldn't speak. The relief was so overwhelming it felt physical, like she'd been holding her breath for a year and could finally exhale. Emma was going to be okay. Not just okay, she was going to live and grow up and have all the experiences Sarah had been afraid to let herself imagine. "Mommy, are you okay?" Emma asked, concerned by Sarah's tears. "I'm perfect, baby. I'm absolutely perfect." Robert wrapped his arms around both of them, and Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: complete security. Not just financial security, though that was part of it, but the deep, settled feeling of knowing that whatever challenges came next, they wouldn't face them alone. "I have something to ask you both," Robert said quietly, and something in his tone made Sarah look up at him. He was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Sarah's heart stop entirely. "Emma," Robert said, getting down on one knee beside her hospital bed, "would it be okay with you if I asked your mommy to marry me?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Like really, really? Really, really? But only if you think it's a good idea. Because if your mommy says yes, that means we'd all be a family together. You'd be stuck with me as a stepdad forever." Emma appeared to consider this very seriously. "Would I still get to keep my last name? Because I like being Emma Thompson." "Absolutely. You can be Emma Thompson forever if you want." "And would you still play card games with me even when I make up new rules? Especially when you make up new rules. And would you help me learn programming like mommy does?" "I would love to help you learn programming." Emma nodded decisively. "Okay, you can ask her. But you should know that mommy cries when she's really happy, so don't be scared if she starts crying." Robert turned to Sarah, still on one knee, holding a ring that caught the light from the hospital room windows. "Sarah Thompson, you and Emma have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. You've made me remember why success matters, not for what it can buy but for what it can do for people you love. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at this man who had seen her daughter's worth in a crumpled $100 bill, who had recognized Sarah's talent when others overlooked it, who had saved Emma's life without asking for anything in return, who had somehow made their little family complete. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it had always belonged there. Emma cheered and insisted on examining the diamond closely to make sure it was sparkly enough for mommy. The nurses who had been listening from the hallway burst into applause. As Robert kissed her in Emma's hospital room, surrounded by the medical equipment that had helped save her daughter's life, Sarah realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest acts of faith. A little girl believing that a stranger might listen. A mother learning to trust again. A billionaire remembering what really matters. "This is definitely the best day ever," Emma announced. "Even better than when I got cured, because now we're going to be a real family forever." And Sarah, looking at her healthy daughter and her fiancé and the future that stretched out before them bright with possibility, couldn't have agreed more. The small chapel at Mercy Children's Hospital was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, exactly the way Emma had envisioned it. When Sarah had asked where she wanted the wedding to be held, Emma had been very clear: "In the place where I got better, so all the doctors and nurses who helped me can come to the party." Sarah stood in the tiny bridal suite, adjusting her simple white dress and trying to calm her nerves. It had been 3 months since Robert's proposal, 3 months of planning a wedding while adjusting to their new life together. Emma was not only completely healthy but thriving in her new school, making friends and catching up on all the experiences her illness had put on hold. "You look beautiful, Mommy," Emma said, twirling in her pale pink flower girl dress. "Robert is going to be so happy when he sees you." "I'm happy he's going to see me," Sarah admitted. "I'm happy about all of this." There had been moments over the past few months when Sarah had wondered if she was dreaming, if this new life was too good to be real. But Robert had been patient with her doubts, understanding about her need to maintain some independence even as they planned a life together. He'd insisted she keep her own apartment until after the wedding, had encouraged her to negotiate her own salary and benefits, had made it clear that he wanted a partner, not someone he was rescuing. "Mrs. Thompson?" A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "It's Janet, Mr. Sterling's assistant. He asked me to give you this." Janet handed Sarah a small envelope with her name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. Inside was a brief note and a photograph. "Sarah, Emma reminded me that our story started with her paying for my time. I thought you should know that some investments pay dividends forever. Robert." The photograph was from their first dinner at Bella Vista, taken by the waitress Emma had charmed into capturing the moment. Sarah looked at the image of the three of them sharing chocolate cake, Emma grinning with chocolate on her nose, Robert looking at Emma with wonder, and Sarah herself looking cautiously hopeful. "What is it, Mommy?" Emma asked, peering at the photo. "It's us," Sarah said softly. "The night everything changed. I remember that night. That's when I knew Robert was going to be part of our family, even before he knew it." Sarah smiled at her daughter's confidence. Emma had developed an uncanny ability to understand people's feelings, sometimes better than they understood themselves. She'd announced at breakfast 2 weeks ago that Sarah and Robert were totally in love but trying to pretend it's just about being practical, which had made both adults laugh and blush. Music began to play in the chapel. Not the traditional wedding march, but the gentle melody Emma had chosen from her favorite movie about families who found each other. Sarah took Emma's hand and together they walked toward the doorway. The chapel was small but packed. Robert's business associates sat next to nurses from Emma's treatment floor. Sarah's few remaining family members were there, along with the programmers from her team who had become like family over the past months. Dr. Martinez was in the front row, beaming with pride at seeing Emma healthy and happy. But Sarah only had eyes for Robert, standing at the altar in his navy suit, looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Beside him stood his best man. Surprisingly, it was Tom, the security guard from Sterling Tower who had become Emma's friend during her frequent visits to the office. Emma walked down the aisle first, taking her job as flower girl very seriously, making sure each rose petal was perfectly placed. When she reached the altar, she whispered something to Robert that made him smile and nod. Then Sarah walked toward the man who had changed her life, in the place where her daughter had been saved, surrounded by people who had helped them through the hardest and best year of their lives. The ceremony was simple and perfect. They'd written their own vows with Emma's input, of course. "Sarah," Robert said when it was his turn to speak, "you and Emma taught me that the best investments aren't in companies or stocks or real estate. They're in people and love and the kind of courage that walks up to a stranger with a $100 bill and believes the world can be fair. I promise to spend every day earning the trust you've placed in me." Sarah's vows were equally heartfelt. "Robert, you saw Emma's worth when she was just a sick little girl with big dreams. You saw my potential when I couldn't see it myself. You didn't just help us, you believed in us. I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of Emma's faith in fairy tales." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emma cheered before they'd even kissed, making everyone in the chapel laugh. The reception was held in the hospital's community room, with cake and dancing and enough joy to power the entire building. Emma appointed herself the official photographer, taking pictures of everyone and insisting that each photo needed to capture the happiness. Late in the evening, as the celebration was winding down, Sarah found herself standing with Robert on the small balcony overlooking the city. Emma was inside, teaching some of the younger patients the card game she'd invented, her laughter carrying through the open doors. "Any regrets?" Robert asked, wrapping his arms around Sarah from behind. "Only that we can't go back and tell my scared, desperate self from a year ago that everything was going to be okay," Sarah said, leaning back against his chest. She was so afraid of hoping for too much. She was protecting Emma and herself the best way she knew how. But Emma was right to hope. Sometimes the impossible things are just waiting for the right moment to become possible. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them. Somewhere in one of those buildings was the apartment where Sarah used to lie awake calculating medical bills. Somewhere else was the office where Morrison had stolen her work. But those places felt like they belonged to someone else's story now. "I love you," Sarah said quietly, still amazed that she got to say those words and mean them completely. "I love you too. Both of you. More than I ever thought possible." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her flower girl dress but now with frosting in her hair and a sleepy smile on her face. "Are you guys having a moment? Because if you are, I want to be part of it." Robert laughed and held out his arm. "Come here, Emma Sterling Thompson." Emma had decided she wanted to hyphenate her name after all, declaring that Sterling Thompson sounded like someone who could be both a scientist and an adventurer. She snuggled between them and Sarah felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "This was the best wedding ever," Emma announced. "All my favorite people were there and the cake was perfect and now we're a real family forever." "Forever," Robert agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Emma's head. As they went back inside to say goodbye to their guests, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in the glass doors. A year ago, it had been just her and Emma against the world, struggling and scared and trying to be brave. Now they were three people who belonged together, who had found each other in the most unexpected way, who had built something beautiful from a moment of pure faith. The most remarkable part wasn't the fairy tale ending. It was knowing that this was really just the beginning. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the main conference room of Sterling Tower, looking out at the assembled crowd of journalists, investors and tech industry leaders who had come to see the official launch of Aria, the adaptive relational intelligence assistant that her team had spent the past year developing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert was saying from the podium, "what you're about to see represents the future of human-computer interaction. Aria doesn't just process commands or recognize speech patterns. She understands context, emotion, and intent in ways that will revolutionize how we think about artificial intelligence. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as her cue approached. In a few minutes she would be presenting her work to some of the most influential people in technology. A year ago she'd been afraid to speak up in department meetings. Now she was about to introduce an innovation that could change everything. Emma, now 10 years old and completely healthy, sat in the front row next to Robert's parents, who had flown in for the launch. Emma was wearing a t-shirt that said, "My mom taught a computer to have feelings," and looked like she was about to burst with pride. The lead developer of Aria, Robert continued, is someone who understands better than anyone that the most powerful technology comes from human insight and creativity. My wife, Sarah Sterling Thompson. Sarah walked to the podium amid enthusiastic applause, her confidence growing with each step. She'd learned over the past year that she was good at this, not just the programming but the explaining, the inspiring, the leading of teams toward impossible goals. 2 years ago, Sarah began, my daughter asked me why computers were so smart but couldn't tell when people were sad. It seemed like such a simple question, but it led to the most complex project of my career. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Aria isn't just artificial intelligence. She's artificial emotional intelligence. She can read micro-expressions, analyze voice patterns, and respond to human emotions in real time. But more than that, she learns and adapts to individual users, becoming more helpful and intuitive over time. The demonstration that followed was flawless. Aria responded to questions with appropriate emotion, offered comfort to a volunteer who mentioned feeling stressed, and even recognized when someone was joking and responded with appropriate humor. The audience was clearly impressed, but Sarah could see something more than professional interest in their expressions. They were seeing the future. The applications are limitless, Sarah continued. Healthcare monitoring that can detect depression or anxiety before patients realize they're struggling. Educational software that adapts to a student's emotional state and learning style. Customer service that actually provides comfort and understanding, not just information. During the question and answer session that followed, Sarah fielded inquiries about technical specifications, market potential, and development timelines with the easy confidence of someone who knew her subject inside and out. When a journalist asked about the inspiration for the project, Sarah smiled and looked at Emma. My daughter taught me that the most important questions often come from the simplest observations. She saw something the adult world had accepted as impossible and asked why it had to stay that way. After the presentation, as the crowd mingled and journalists conducted interviews, Robert found Sarah near the windows overlooking the city. How does it feel to change the world? He asked, sliding his arm around her waist. It feels like the beginning of something even bigger, Sarah said honestly. Aria is just the first step. There's so much more we can do with emotional AI, so many ways to make technology more human. And the job offers? Robert asked with amusement. I counted at least 6 CEOs who looked like they wanted to steal you away from me. Sarah laughed. They can try. But I like working with my husband. Besides, Emma would never forgive me if I moved her away from her favorite building. Emma had indeed claimed Sterling Tower as her personal playground. She knew every security guard by name, had convinced the cafeteria staff to stock her favorite cookies, and had established herself as the unofficial mascot of the AI development team. The programmers had taken to consulting her whenever they were stuck on a problem, claiming that her 8-year-old perspective often provided breakthrough insights. Speaking of Emma, Robert said, she has something she wants to show you. They found Emma in Sarah's office, sitting at the computer with intense concentration. On the screen was a simple but elegant program that displayed animated flowers growing in response to positive words typed into a text box. Emma, this is beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely impressed. Did you write this yourself? Robert helped me with some of the hard parts, but most of it is mine, Emma said proudly. It's called the Happiness Garden. I thought maybe kids in hospitals could use it when they're feeling scared or sad. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Even in creating her first program, Emma had thought about helping other children who were facing what she had faced. I think it's perfect, Sarah said, hugging her daughter tightly. I think Dr. Martinez would love to have this for the children's ward. Really? You think other kids would like it? I think other kids are going to love it. That evening, as they walked through the city toward their favorite restaurant for a celebration dinner, Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed. They lived in a beautiful house now, in a neighborhood where Emma could ride her bike and play with friends without worry. Sarah's work was being recognized internationally, and she had a team of brilliant programmers who looked to her for leadership and inspiration. But the most important change wasn't in their circumstances. It was in their sense of security, their knowledge that they could handle whatever challenges came next because they had each other. "Mommy," Emma said as they waited for their table, "do you remember when I gave Robert the $100? "Of course I remember. That was the day that changed everything. I was thinking about it in math class today and I figured out something cool." Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Robert said his time was worth $100, right? And I paid him for 1 minute? Right. But we've been a family for over a year now. That's like more than 500,000 minutes. So if Robert kept his promise and gave me all that time, I got the best deal ever in the history of deals." Robert laughed so hard he nearly choked on his water. "Emma Sterling Thompson, you are absolutely right. That might be the best return on investment anyone has ever gotten." "What's return on investment?" Emma asked with genuine curiosity. "It's when you spend money on something and get back even more value than what you paid," Sarah explained. Emma considered this seriously. "So when I spent my $100 on Robert's time and got a dad and a happy mommy and a family and everyone I love being healthy, that's a really good return on investment?" "The best possible return on investment," Robert said softly. As they were seated for dinner, Sarah thought about investments and returns and the unexpected ways that love multiplies when you're brave enough to risk it. Emma had invested her birthday money in the possibility that a stranger might listen. Robert had invested his resources in people he barely knew. Sarah had invested her trust in the hope that sometimes fairy tales come true. And they had all received returns beyond anything they could have calculated or expected. "You know what?" Sarah said, raising her glass of water in a mock toast. "Here's to Emma Thompson, venture capitalist and matchmaker extraordinaire." Emma giggled and raised her own glass. "Here's to Robert Sterling, who keeps his promises and gives really good hugs." Robert raised his glass last. "Here's to Sarah Sterling Thompson, who taught a computer to have feelings and taught me that the best investments are always in people." As they clinked glasses in their favorite restaurant, surrounded by the warmth of love and laughter and the promise of whatever adventures lay ahead, Sarah realized that Emma had been right. Sometimes, when you're brave enough to offer someone exactly what you think their time is worth, you discover that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely, received gratefully, and treasured forever. And that, Sarah thought as she watched her husband help their daughter cut her chicken into perfect bite-sized pieces, was the most perfect investment of all. Thank you for joining Sarah, Emma, and Robert on their incredible journey from that first desperate moment in the hospital waiting room to their beautiful new life together. This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of courage, like an 8-year-old girl offering a crumpled $100 bill, can change everything. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done in Emma's situation? Would you have been brave enough to approach a stranger with such an unusual request? Do you believe that successful people have a responsibility to help others when they can? What moment in the story touched you the most and why? Have you ever had an experience where a small gesture led to something much bigger? What do you think Emma will be when she grows up? A programmer like her mom, a business leader like Robert, or something completely different? Your thoughts and experiences help us understand what resonates with readers, and we read every single comment. Don't forget to share this story with someone who might need to believe in second chances and fairy tale endings that come true through courage and kindness.